this morning on this very important topic. I will say, as an entrepreneur who ran a business for 15 years, who lived in distressed communities for the vast majority of my life, that the importance of entrepreneurs in communities cannot be overstated. Frankly, when there are no entrepreneurs in the community, the statistics are consistently the same, unfortunately, throughout the entire nation, and frankly, I would imagine beyond the borders of our country. So the importance of this topic can't be overstated, because it really has a lot to do with culture, not just communities, but the culture that's created within communities because of entrepreneurs and their presence in there. Let me address my first question to Mr. Lettieri. Thank you for your testimony, and I couldn't help but notice the extensive work that EIG has done on the geographic nature of entrepreneurship, job creation, and economic growth. Unfortunately, as you've pointed out, the country is trending towards greater geographic divides when it comes to job creation, particularly in new startup businesses. This geographic divide is causing already struggling communities, like I just mentioned, to fall further into despair, which has broad implications throughout the country without question. In many cases, the difference in an individual's zip code can be the determining factor to success versus failure in this country, and specifically in their businesses and for their employees. For example, in South Carolina, about 30% of our zip codes are economically distressed communities. Additionally, South Carolina ranks as the state with the 5th highest economically distressed zip codes in the entire country. I have, as you mentioned during your testimony recently, sponsored, along with Cory Booker and a couple of my other good friends, soon to be joined by my really good friend in blue over there. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am. Yes, it's just so rare that you do that. Maybe it's rare that I have good ideas. I knew that. Yes. I set myself up for that. And now I'm wasting my time getting beat up by you. So I'm going to continue. Thank you very little. Anyways, as Ms. Lettieri, you talked about the Investing Opportunity Act that we've sponsored and co-sponsored by Cory Booker. The reality of it is the ability to defer capital gains so as to attract more capital into distressed communities, to me, is a no-brainer, frankly. It's good for the economy, good for the community, and ultimately good for the taxpayers. Do you believe that the Investing in Opportunity Act is an effective way to help incentivize a like-minded investor community that you represent and level the playing field between certain geographic areas that we've heard a lot about?
I do, and thank you, Senator, for your leadership on this issue. So your legislation does two things that are critical. One, it creates it removes a disincentive that's really inadvertent in the tax code that keeps an investor who has accumulated capital gains from reinvesting seamlessly into productive investments in areas that need it most. So you're not doing away with their tax bill, but you're pushing it to the back end of the process, so in between, they're rewarded for and not disincentivized to reinvesting those proceeds into areas that we know are seriously underserved. The second thing it does, which is maybe less apparent, is that it removes the big practical burden that many investors have. I firmly believe this country has plenty of capital. It's just not being deployed in areas that need it, and it's not being deployed effectively through public policy. And what your bill does is incentivizes collective behavior among investors to pool their capital and risk. Very few investors on their own have the resources to go in and transform a distressed community solo. But in the aggregate, they have both the capital and the risk pooling that's necessary to actually meet the scale of the challenges. So when you think about the fact that just in the U.S. alone, investors have over $2 trillion in unrealized capital gains assets, some portion of that should be targeted for economic development if we can do it in a market-driven way. We think you've achieved that with your bill.
Thank you very much. Another question really has to do with looking at the ability to pull resources together, what we call opportunity funds, to invest in these opportunity zones. Can you think of geographic locations around the country where folks would be incented to do more if they had the ability, a vehicle to do so? I think specifically of Detroit, where you see, I think it's the CEO of Quicken Loans, has made a major investment back into his hometown of Detroit. My question, though, is not can we find more folks like that, but can we find more folks who would be incented to make investments in communities not their own because of the delay of the capital gains, so as to create real winners around the country?
I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, you cite Detroit, that's a great example of where it's clearly started off as a distressed community when Dan Gilbert started to make his investments, not a place that most people would have marked as a likely turnaround story. What's happened there is not just Dan, but he's helped to catalyze a broader group of investors who've gone in at scale and put not just resources in startups or not just in real estate or not just in one or two industry sectors, but into the whole ecosystem. That type of investor behavior can be transformative. And to your point, it's not enough to rely on a few altruistic investors to get it done. We should be empowering investors of all classes, including retail investors who may want to, just like they give to charity, give some portion of their investment portfolio to these development funds in every state. Because our research shows that there are communities like this in every state. I'm from South Carolina. I grew up in the upstate. No one would have assumed that the upstate of South Carolina would become a hub for innovation and manufacturing and export of automobiles 30 or 40 years ago.
Yes.
It is today because of investment and because that kind of activity catalyzed a whole new ecosystem that transformed that region. We think that potential exists way outside of just Silicon Valley or New York or Boston, but there's a lack of investment capital available to those communities. Again, that's why we think your bill is so important.
Thank you very much. I'm out of time. I'm going to go vote. Ms. Heitkamp.